Welcome, my friends, to the Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guests are Susan Clark and Jolie Diane. Susan was a research assistant at the Harvard School of Public Health for 10 years, from which she holds a certificate in health and human rights. She has exhaustively examined the scientific literature pertaining to the bioeffects of radiofrequency radiation. And Jolie is one of the hardest working anti-geoengineering activists that I know. What makes her activism so unique is her unrelenting drive and ability to take the issue of the covert spraying program directly to the offices of both state and federal lawmakers to challenge the legality of a program that is in clear violation of state and federal laws sworn to protect the people and the environment. This show will dig into the dangerous effects of 5G wireless technology, which is being played up as the next logical step in bringing the Internet of Things into your life, when in reality, the technology is nefarious by its very nature and detrimental to humans and the environment. And to kick the show off, I asked Susan as a first-time guest to take us through her journey in life and how she began her research. Well, folks, we have a very good show today, very interesting and very important topic. We're going to be talking about 5G technology, and my guests today are Susan Clark and Jolie Diane, and Jolie's back with us. She's been on the show a few times talking to us about geoengineering and the legislation in Rhode Island. And 5G is a technology that I personally believe that we all should be very, very concerned about. It is being rolled out, and it's being rolled out very, very quickly. As is typical with these types of things, many people have no idea and no clue what is being brought upon them. So today we're going to talk about that, and we're going to get an understanding of how dangerous 5G is. But before we do that, Susan, how did you end up doing what you're doing?
Well, for about 30 years, I've been advocating the right to environmental health and exposing what are the essential but often suppressed truths. When I was a research assistant at Harvard School of Public Health, I noticed, for example, in various lectures that there were certain taboo topics, things where you just don't go there. And I would always pursue those very things. And that's what led me to discover all sorts of things that were not supposed to have been discovered. I spent a lot of time in the Harvard Quay Medical Library digging out studies from all over the world, especially from Russia, from even the 1930s, 40s, 50s on radiofrequency radiation bioeffects and other topics. And it got to the point where Harvard was sending me out to do their lectures and debates and media presentations on this topic because they understood that I had a wide body of studies and had analyzed them also quantitatively. So I did stimulate some new studies there and organized some lectures. I acquired a certification in health and human rights and worked as a research associate later with the Institute for Media Research of Cambridge, which was looking into the bioeffects of screens, video display terminals. That's become a very big topic now. So I've done a lot of encountering of, with big industry experts and have debated them. And for whatever reason, I always seem to win, even though my approach is very simple. I state conclusions in studies and don't give an opinion, and that seems to win people over. But in any case, it's extremely important. Right now, we have something happening with both geoengineering and a subset of geoengineering, 5G, that is creating more vast changes to Earth's atmosphere and therefore to all of Earth's living beings than anything that has ever happened in the entirety of human history.
Okay, so the technology is more than just connecting things. So what you're saying is, if I'm understanding you correctly, is we have a situation where atmospheric change is going to take place?
Huge atmospheric changes are already taking place, and 5G is being deployed already in many places. It's sort of being deployed under the, it's hiding behind 4G wireless. But 5G actually, which is sort of accompanying it without permissions most of the time, involves about 15 different, or potentially even more, simultaneous microwave lengths or frequencies to be deployed from what are called small cells, but these are actually cell towers. The industry predicts like every third house. However, each block or so needs to have a huge refrigerator-sized power supply in order to irradiate all the homes with partly centimeter and partly millimeter microwave radiation, which is known to be harmful, and it is made even more harmful by the fact that it is not mere continuous wave like a pretty sine wave such as from the sun or other astral bodies, but rather it's digital, it's pulse modulated, it's broken up wave, and that's that causes a lot of interference to humans and animal central nervous systems and to those corresponding systems in plants.
Now, more damage, Susan, than is being done with 4G technology?
Absolutely. Now, 4G is very damaging, and there are a lot of people who, for example, children who can't go to school anymore because of 4G Wi-Fi in schools. But 5G is much, much worse because of the multiple simultaneous frequencies and their specific sizes. For example, there are 10 frequencies or microwave lengths that are in the millimeter range. These are from about to put it back in American terms, about a half inch down to a tenth of an inch. And these wavelengths are optimally absorbed by the skin, eyes, and ears, and can create tinnitus and skin sensations, can produce ocular problems. And then you have these centimeter wavelengths from starting with a 20-inch wave going down to, and again, I'm putting this now in American terms, and let's see, one 20-inch wave, and then there are 4 wavelengths between 2 inches and 4 inches. The 20-inch wave deeply penetrates the body. And the key to understanding this, actually, I should say this, as a wavelength approaches body part size, the absorption of that wavelength increases exponentially. So you don't want to ever have a wavelength that's near a body part size. And here we've got something that's about 20 inches, which is optimally harmful to babies and children. And then you've got 2 to 4 inch wavelengths that are optimized for harm and by way of optimal absorption in key organs, brain, heart, kidney, lungs, genitalia, and so forth, thymus, thyroid, and so forth. So these are maximized for harm. And then on top of the wavelengths, when you digitalize these, pulse modulate them, that makes them even more effective in causing harm in the human body, animal bodies, and plant bodies.
Okay, so before the show, I did some research on low-level wireless radio frequencies exposure, human exposure to them, and some of the harmful effects. So I'll read some of this stuff off and I'll get your viewpoint, Susan and Jolie, on this. DNA single and double strand breaks, oxidative damage, disruption of cell metabolism, increased blood-brain barrier permeability, melatonin reduction. Susan, I actually watched another presentation that you did, I guess, a few years ago where you talked about the effects on melatonin. Maybe we could speak about that a little bit too. Disruption to brain glucose metabolism and generation of stress proteins. So in the previous lecture, you had mentioned also that we have to be careful about using the word risk, right?
Well, the reason why this is not some mere risk is because every living being is affected, number one, and number two is affected in multiple ways. You just cited some of the ways. There are all sorts of other, and that was just a very brief presentation, as you acknowledged. There are many, many, many other damages at every level, at the molecular level even, at the cellular organelle level, at the cell level, at the organ level, at the whole body level, the central nervous system level, of course. And then we can even talk about population level. So at all of these different levels, there are harmful effects. And to confine them or to limit that reality is to actually misrepresent. So we have to be very clear that this is not some mere risk, something may or may not happen. No. There will be harm to every living being. That's why this is just such a potent weapon. It also is very potent because it's invisible and in large part impalpable, but even where it is palpable, people don't know how to attribute what they feel or sense to the radiation that is in their environment unless they have measuring equipment.
Okay, so you said it's a weapon. It sounds like what you're saying is first and foremost, it is to inflict harm on humans.
It is a weapon, and it is known to be a weapon, and where we have knowledge of harm and those in charge have that knowledge and are still doing it anyway, then that is intentional harm.
Okay, so do you think the people that are rolling it out, that's their specific agenda to cause harm, or do you think that there are people that are engaged in the deployment of this, but they're completely duped into believing that, hey, what's wrong with more bandwidth? What's wrong with more connectivity? What's wrong with the Internet of Things? Don't you want your life to be as simple as that? How do you break that down? Because this is something that people struggle with.
I'll give you both sides of that answer here because, for example, on April 22nd, I was at FCC in D.C. Attending a meeting of the various people who are trying to figure out ways to override all state and local regulations so that 5G can go in very quickly. And they came from all of the different, telecom and telecom corporations and different sectors of society. There was one woman there representing agriculture. There was one woman representing Native Americans. And these people had gotten together, again, for the point of a quick rollout without being impeded by state and local regulations that had been put in place, in some cases, over long periods of time. For example, Wayland, Massachusetts spent 18 months just designing its wireless regulations. So these should be respected, but the committee was appointed to figure out how to override all of that good research and work. Just as one example, the woman, older woman representing agriculture said to the group, well, I got to tell you, we've got wireless tractors that can just go out in the fields. They don't even need any but driverless tractors. They can just go out there and as long as they're directed, from the internet. And we've got automatic cow milking machines that can just be turned on from far and nobody needs to be there. And anyway, she was explaining this. And so she gave none of the other side of the story, which is that all of those beings, the cows, the plants, whatever is on a farm that is about life, is being harmed by those things. And I whispered to her at one point, are you aware that within a year, or probably less, all pollinating insects would be killed off by 5G wireless radiation wherever it's deployed? And she said, oh, no, I had no idea. Let's talk afterward. So we did. These people, in some ways, who are appointed to these positions may be ignorant. However, I'll give you the other side of the story. Deborah Lee Davis, who was the third to the helm of Health and Human Services back in the 90s, she's a PhD and MPH, so she's a public health scientist. Dr. Davis went to Silicon Valley and visited with upper-level representatives from Google and Apple and so forth. And it turns out that they did not allow their children to have wireless devices. Steve Jobs himself would not allow his children to have wireless devices. So there is definitely some knowledge amongst these people. I'll give you another example. I believe it was the telecom Comcast that back in the 90s, I learned that the CEO had taken all the big money that he'd gotten and had bought up some property out in the southwest desert and had built himself a home with chicken wire built into all of the walls. Okay, so he had enough knowledge and enough money that he could go out there and protect himself. Meanwhile, he was harming everyone else. So let's go above that level. The military intelligence. Those folks definitely know because they use this stuff as a weapon. They've done endless experimentation through, research through the decades. The Russians started several decades earlier, actually, than the West did, but the West caught up, of course. And by 1990, there were already approximately 20,000 studies that were reviewed by the IEEE, that's Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers committee that set the guidelines for US FCC, Federal Communications Commission. So they know that this is harmful, there's no doubt. And Jolie can also tell you how from the, let's say, pure geoengineering atmospheric contaminant side of things, that was all known back in the 60s, even back just after World War II as well. So a lot of this knowledge has been there. Perhaps it was classified for some time. Perhaps some of it is open to the public now. But it's most important to understand that with regard to 5G, it's not just the specific wavelengths that have been chosen to target specific organs. It's not just the pulse modulation or digitalization of the signal, the breaking up of the signal that has enormous interference with cellular function and CNS or central nervous system function. It's also the fact that 5G is intended to be concentrated semi-directionally into a 15-degree arc. That deployment approaches a maser. A maser is a microwave laser. Okay, if that 15-degree arc were closed, that would be called direct energy weaponry. Okay, we open it up to 15 degrees, and we've got a very strong signal beaming right into, in most cases, second-story bedroom windows of homes.
So if somebody said to you, Susan, okay, so let's say the 5G gets rolled out, so a few years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, let's say a decade. We'll pick a decade. What would the typical human being, what symptoms do you believe they would be experiencing or suffering because of the exposure to 5G?
Okay, number one, nobody's going to be able to sleep. Already almost everyone, well, everyone's sleep is somewhat impaired, objectively speaking, because of the melatonin problem that you cited earlier. All radiofrequency radiation and light suppresses our hormone melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that gives us a great night's sleep. We feel good in the morning, energetic. Melatonin rises up with the moon and then toward morning as we start to get some sunlight through the 2 to 4 cell layers of our eyelids. That sunlight starts to come through and we gradually wake up. Why? Because our melatonin is changing into serotonin. So we're awake by day, and then as the sun sets and the moon comes out, okay, sun with serotonin, and then moon with melatonin again. Okay, is that how we can think of it, SS or MM? And melatonin is a free radical scavenger. It cleanses our bodies overnight. It helps prevent cancer by doing so. And it also gives us this great night's rest that makes us energetic and productive, and it helps us to think clearly the next day. So when melatonin is suppressed, people don't sleep well. They're not very productive. They can't think. They can't remember correctly. They are zombified, if you don't mind my using that word, okay, to a certain extent. And everyone, to a certain extent, is that way. So now, bring in 5G, and guess what happens? Then you've got people who are much more zombified, many more people who can't function at all, kids who are at once hyperactive and fatigued, right, because the two go hand in hand, right? There are studies now that show, by the way, that women who used cell phones a lot during a pregnancy tend to have kids who have attention deficit, ADD, ADHD. So these are connected. So what happens by contrast when people find a place where they can go out in the woods and there's no radiation? You know, it's very, very hard to find any place like that. But suddenly they have a whole different experience of life. Or let's say that suddenly the electricity goes off and there's nothing, right? Everything is shut down. People feel so relaxed and they can feel blissful, and they can get grounded again in the electrical sense. So these are the contrasts. We humans grew up in a milieu that had extremely little radio frequency radiation, particularly in these microwave frequencies, which I would say is probably why life grew up on Earth in the sizes of these wavelengths that were so very, very minimal. Why were they so minimal? Because of all of those wavelengths that were coming from the sun and other stars, our atmosphere that contains water was absorbing them. Water is very absorbent of this radiation, which is why we, who are, more than 70% water, are very, very absorbent of this radiation. We're like sponges for it, walking sponges. And that also means, by the way, that all the energy that is deployed, and it's enormously energy wasteful to do wireless anything. But anytime we have this huge energy deposition upon our bodies, we're absorbing most of that, and only a tiny, tiny bit, less than 1%, ever gets used for a device, for communications. And even that is completely unnecessary because, as people can remember, if they're at least 10 years old, all internet used to be wired.
Right.
So Wi-Fi is completely unnecessary.
See, the problem is the changes in the effects to people is incremental. So it gets explained away by your job, stress at home, whatever it may be. And that's the problem. See, people have a very hard time connecting the dots that maybe they're feeling fatigued or, they're not sleeping. They feel stressed. They have cloudy thoughts and all this stuff. They never or very rarely ever tie it back to the technology.
Well, part of the reason that is true is because they're brainwashed. How many of them are sitting or vegging in front of a TV screen or watching videos on into the night for entertainment? That's why. It's because they're not getting this information. They think that they're getting information from news, but what does the news do? It deprives them of the most critical things for their lives, right? And so they think it makes it harder for them to believe it, right? And then they go to some big box store, and what do they see? Big signs that say, cut the cable. Are you ready to cut the cable? And they're told that over and over and over again that it's a good thing to go wireless. And so they can't conceive, they can't change their brains around after they've been brainwashed. It's very, very hard for them. But if people can avoid those kinds of stores and avoid TV in particular, and not just use an internet or a computer screen for entertainment, but actually seek information deeply like you did when you looked up the effects of radio frequency radiation, then they'll get some good information.
Yeah, well, most people, they don't do any research. They don't do any homework. They just absorb and take in whatever it is that's told to them on the television set and so on. So let me just ask Jolie to jump in for a second, Susan. So Jolie, where is this all going? In other words, why are they doing this? Is it for the purposes of just getting everything connected? Is it for the purpose of harming humanity? Is it surveillance? Is it intelligence? Is it commerce-oriented, or all of the above?
It could be all of the above, I think. The main thing about being bathed in the radiation is there's no liberty there. It's impossible for us to experience freedom in that blissful state, as Susan was mentioning. So the nonstop bathing in these dangerous microwaves, against our will, against our knowledge, really understanding, that's unacceptable. I wanted to cite a recent article. It's from this year, from March, and it's from Miltech, Blackbird Miltech. Anyway, the title is "The Internet of Things Poses Human Health Risks. Scientists question the safety of untested 5G technology at international conference." This thing is just talking about Israeli research studies presented at an international conference revealed that the same electromagnetic frequencies used for crowd control weapons form the foundation of the latest network branded as 5G. That will be together more than 50 billion devices as part of the Internet of Things. Current investigations of wireless frequencies in the millimeter and submillimeter range confirm that these waves interact directly with human skin, specifically the sweat glands. And so Susan, can tell us a lot more about that. But, at the end of the day, this is like the invasive technology of geoengineering. It's something that we didn't choose. It's not natural. We're supposed to have the same frequency as the Earth. We cannot accept being blanketed with these frequencies that are foreign to our biology, and they've gotten away with this for decades and decades, as we've discussed at length, just because it's part of the military apparatus and they do what they want and they could care less and even less about the environment or anyone's health.
It's almost like they're a Borg in the sense that what I'm getting out of this is, when I did the research and looking into this, is that it's an incessant desire for accumulation of data, wanting to know everything.
Well, and to control everything.
And control everything, exactly. So when you have the data, what happens is then you're able to, at least in their minds, they have the analytics to better control things.
Mm-hmm.
And they're able to do this now with the Internet of Things without the direct interaction of humans. In other words, humans are docile in this equation once we get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just going to be able to pull stuff off of you based upon things that you're using, things that you're engaging. You don't have to do anything. You just basically inhale and exhale, use your phone, watch your TV, drive your car, whatever it may be, and they're going to tap into you. Okay? So the question I have, though, is you said, Jolie, that, and Susan, you can also chime in here, that they don't have consent to do this. So do they, or did they have consent to do 1G, 2G, and then what they're doing, at least in their minds, from a legal perspective, is tacking on to a previous okay, a previous green light?
They never really did have consent of the people. Indeed, I forget the senator's name from Kansas from way back in the mid-'90s, who made a very potent statement before the Senate when the Telecommunications Act of '96 was what became that. But back in '95, when it was under discussion, he said, this has never gone before the American people. They don't want it. They don't need it. This will create more vast changes than anything that's ever been done, and it's been kept completely apart from the people. There was not one single public hearing for that act that had these huge, huge effects upon the public and then led to 3G, 4G, 5G. So no, there is no consent, not that there has ever needed to be from the military intelligence corporate perspective, right? I did want to point out, by the way, people refer often to Eisenhower's famous speech where, beware the military industrial complex. But indeed, when he had originally penned his own speech, he had said, beware the military intelligence industrial complex. And the intelligence community came in and vetted that speech and removed themselves from it. But we need to remember it's military intelligence industrial complex. And it is a complex. It's been a complex from, way, 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 way back. And it is indeed controlled by outsiders as well, by bankers, by the largest bankers. There's a wonderful series of videos, for example, by Ronald Bernard, who was a financier, kind of servicing the upper sort of within the realm of the upper 8,000 bankers of the world, or owners, you might say, as they conceive themselves. And he pointed out how they would just, pay for these things to happen. They just made all sorts of changes that people don't understand why they're becoming poor, why their business was ruined, and so forth. And it was because of some intention from the top. And these people were enjoying, as a sport, seeing people suffer. So I would point out that in answer to your question, this is known to be eco-genocidal between 5G and geoengineering. They know this.
Yeah, okay. So, again, this is a question I know it's very difficult to answer. Why? Why are they doing it? Why do they want this eco-genocide? What would be the end game? What would be the result?
I mean, Bill Gates has been more open than others about this, about needing, as he would put it, to bring population way down. Ted Turner feels the human population should come down to 2 million. Bill Gates is talking 5 million. CIA has talked 5 million in the past. When we're when we say that kind of number, it sounds like a lot of people to us, but you don't realize that at once. That means getting rid of, depending which figure you use and depending how many people you consider to be in the world right now, and I think there are over 8 billion, it means bringing the population down by somewhere between like 97 and 99%.
Yeah, well, we can look at the Georgia Guidestones for that number, right? 500 million?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And of course that was a CIA project.
Right.
So obviously there's an intention to bring human population way, way, way down. As Ted Gunderson, who used to be an FBI agent and became a whistleblower, said before he died, that in these camps, now called FEMA camps, there are hundreds of guillotines just there waiting, ready to take care of people, to harvest people, as they actually call it in public health science. Harvest. So what can we do about this? I think that we need to really unite, as Ronald Bernard also strongly urges, and I urge people to watch that, even though it's, in a sense, on a different topic, but it gives us that picture, that overarching picture that you're asking about and that we should ask about. He also says in that interview that the interviewer asked him, well, how much did you really know about the projects that you were engaged in? And these were nefarious projects. And he said, oh, I had to know everything. I had to know 100% because otherwise, things could fall apart, So he had to have all the knowledge in order to strategize. And I just want to say we need that too as human beings. We all need to know as much as we can about all of this, even though it's difficult, it's dark, it's dirty. We need to kind of protect ourselves, perhaps spiritually, go in with that light around us, and then delve into this, understand what it is, know what it is, because then with that knowledge, we can strategize, unify together, and make things happen for the good.
Yeah, well, I agree that this information has to go out. People have to they have to awaken to it. They have to become aware. That's why I keep pushing and drilling down on what do we think the end state is. What is it that they're really driving toward here? What does the finish line look like? So hearing you guys, it sounds like a big piece of this is depopulation.
Yeah, and control, global control. I mean, they said it in Agenda 21. It's not a mystery. I mean, they have been telling us every step of the way and it's been directed and guided towards, they want to control everybody through the military. And we've seen the steps happen, all these towers going up in America, all the surveillance coming in America. George Bush told us that they hate our freedoms, but he was incorrect. He hates our freedoms. The 1% hates our freedoms because if we have free thinking people, if we have a free society, we're not interested in their wars. We're not interested in causing any harm. We're not going to follow their agenda. So, what's their end game? We know what their end game is. What's our end game? What's our offensive plan? How do we derail them? We've been coming through how many centuries or millennia right to this time where they've shown us everything, and they're vulnerable. They're at a vulnerable state. And I think that's why they've got, everything has been ramped up, in terms of the 5G and the geoengineering. And like, as you said, it's over slowly over time.
Right.
And the compartmentalization of things so that, people are aware of this much, but then they don't really want to look outside of the frame. And so that's what we're just trying to do is to connect some of these frames. They all go together. Bill Gates is in the geoengineering, the vaccine frame, the Monsanto frame. So he's just one of these people. But, there's a paper trail leading to who is waging this war on us. And so, there it is right there. I think that we've been waiting to see what they're going to do. Are they going to roll this out? Well, and so that's why we're trying to step up and say, well, let's show up in these state houses now.
And be proactive.
Let's get groups of us together and talk about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable and what we expect.
Okay, no, it's an anti-humanity agenda. I agree completely. And like I said, I'm trying to drill this down so that the person who's listening to this show has a very clear understanding of what it is that they're driving toward. So what about transhumanism, right? That's another big aspect. that's on the table with the so-called elites. I call them the controllers because that's what they like to do. They like to control. I mean, do you see this playing into transhumanism?
I do, and I think, in a sense, if anything scares me, it actually is that transbiologic organisms, some of which are literally dropping from the sky from geoengineering releases, and what that does to people in terms of Morgellons disease, although there are ways to counter this. And I would refer people to the wonderful Tony Pantallaresco shows on, I'll get you that link.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll put the links in the show notes. Yep.
Okay, great. Because we need to be taking action on these. And by the way, Jolie, thank you. I just applaud you for what you said. When we unite with a lot of knowledge, then we together as this huge human organism, right, collecting also with our fellow sisters and brothers, the animals and the plants, as native or more indigenous philosophy would have it. We have really a lot of power to overcome some of these nefarious efforts like transbiologics and transhumanism. We have so much power. We just need to get it together and use it. I would suggest, for example, Jolie, you know about the July 23rd to 28th meeting in Maine. It's not open to the public, but certainly some people could get there. It's in Newry, Maine, Newry, and this is the conference. The Critical Global Discussions. It's called. It's the Gordon Gordon Research Conference on Solar Climate Engineering. Again, Gordon Research Conference on Solar Climate Engineering. And, even though it's not open to the public, certainly people can do some great things. Look at all the people who somehow managed to get into other big fora, right? Global discussions. And so that might be very, very important and powerful to, get some people inside of this and make some recordings to allow the whole world to learn about this. If those who are, already in Maine or New England can get there, that would be very valuable. And I think also it would be helpful to everyone when we start to hear conversations about climate change. We need to ask the question, is it climate change or is it geoengineering? We need to say that over and over again because some things may be one and some things may be the other, but the fact is, if we're not sure whether it's one or the other, then how can any plans go forward for one or the other, right?
Right.
In other words, the powers that be would want us to think that geoengineering is the solution to climate change, when actually climate change has been produced by way of geoengineering.
Exactly.
So,
exactly right.
Geoengineering is the problem, not the solution.
Well, they never talk about it. When they go to the conferences, they go to the Paris Climate Conference. I know folks that went there, the so-called researchers and scientists, they never factor in the fact that there's geoengineering and spraying taking place into any of their discussions or any of their models. It's the most mind-boggling thing. And you would think that these people sitting in these rooms have they have a higher IQ. And they would be able to look up in the sky and see what's going on. But yet, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, see, this is what I found at Harvard, and it was really quite intriguing to me at the time, that people would be, it was almost as if they were sort of entranced. There were things that they knew that they couldn't talk about, can't go there, can't do that. And on a few occasions, they actually told me why. And I'll share that with you. For example, with regard to radiofrequency microwave radiation, I was sharing a reasonably small pack of studies with the two top professors in Boston, one at Harvard and one at Boston University School of Public Health. And it was a reasonable packet that they could read, like a skim through in a week or a couple of weeks. So I went to the one guy, and he kept saying, "Oh, no, I haven't read it yet. No, I haven't read it yet." I'd call weekly. "No, I haven't read it yet." finally, after about 2 months, he said, look, he said, I can't read this. If I were to read this, I would be called upon to speak about it. And if I spoke about this, I would lose my department's funding.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And the other guy said, I kept bringing it to him. Oh, I threw it out. He said, I'll bring him a new packet. Oh, I don't have time. Okay. That's all right. Take your time. Here. Finally, he said, I can't read this. I can't speak about this. I would lose, if I spoke about this, I would lose my tenure and my classes. I'm just trying to quote exactly. And then he said, I have a 2-year-old. Okay, these are quotes. So the thing is, if anybody else, like, you know, in society generally, were to hear a conversation like that, let's say on a TV show or something, they think, these guys are paranoid. That's nuts. You're a top-notch researcher. You're a professor. You can't lose your tenure. You can't lose your department's funding by talking about something that is true scientifically. They just take the studies and cite the conclusions. What's wrong with that? People would think it was absolutely psychotic paranoid of them. But you see, they've been taught behind the scenes over and over, you don't go there. Don't go there.
Yeah.
Don't talk about that. Do you see this guy who lost his career over X, Y, or Z? See, you'll lose your career too. They hear these things. They watch them behind it. And there are always people who are made an example of, right? Sorry about that ungrammatical sentence.
Don't worry about it.
I ended with of. There was a guy from Rhode Island, for example, who, a wonderful physician, researcher, public health scientist, who had discovered that workers at a particular plant were inhaling certain particles of a certain size that were particularly harmful, and they were getting a certain kind of new medical condition. And he identified this, and he wrote a paper on it. Well, it turned out, and he was told he must not speak about this. He was going to a scientific conference out in California. He said, of course I'm going to speak about it. How can I not? This is my research. This is what I found. These are the facts. Well, he spoke about it at the conference, and he immediately lost his job at Brown University Hospital. Turned out Brown University Hospital had investments in that company that was doing the nefarious things and harming its workers. And that researcher to this day has nothing more than a small family medical practice. That's all that he was fired from everything, lost everything, blacklisted. And that's light compared to what happens to some people, because there have been like 5 people in our radio frequency radiation bioeffects network who have had their homes burnt down.
Is that right?
I've been hit with a maser. Yeah, and I've been hit with a maser. I've had attempts on my life. So these kinds of things do happen to those of us who are sort of out there.
Now, how do you know, Susan, you were hit with a frequency? How do you know that?
With a maser?
Yeah.
Oh, because it was the night before. I had no idea what was coming the next day through the Associated Press. It was actually an article about a petition that I had circulated amongst top-notch researchers at both Harvard and Boston University Schools of Public Health, and also at MIT. And that was a very strong petition that said that the entire PCS cell phone system should be halted. That meant the infrastructure, too. No devices, no infrastructure. The entire thing should be halted based on the biological plausibility of harm and also on reports of injuries and deaths that had already taken place in cities where the system had been installed. So it was a very strongly worded legal petition, and it was signed by over 100 scientists in the Boston area. And essentially all the top people had signed it. So unbeknownst to me, the Associated Press had picked up the story. And I was sitting in a living room. You know, I was in one corner. There was an elderly woman that I was taking care of, living in another corner. She was, sitting in another corner. And the TV was in front of both of us on the far wall. And I was talking with her, gesturing, when all of a sudden something overtook me. It was a tone between the innermost points of my inner ears that overwhelmed my brain. It caused me to fall back in the chair. I've never had an experience like this ever before. My hands dropped to my sides. I had no motor control. I still had sensory perception, however. And at the very moment that this happened to me, and there was a tone like, ooh, actually, there, in between those two inner points. And I can't describe how awful it was. Right? That doesn't sound bad, but it was awful. It was a horrible experience. And at that very same moment, the TV, which had been 60 Minutes, the elderly woman liked to watch 60 Minutes on Sunday nights, the TV went into complete interference and stayed in complete interference until suddenly it stopped. The tone stopped inside me, and the TV, 60 Minutes, came back. And the woman said to me, and of course I was able to sit up a little then, and she said, "What happened to you?" And I tried to describe what had happened, and I didn't understand what it was at the time, but I thought there's some connection between UHF here, an ultra-high frequency, and my body. It didn't affect her, and I figured out that someone had aimed a maser at me, and of course the TV would have gotten caught in that because it's a similar wavelength or frequency. The very next morning, a friend called me and said, "Oh, congratulations for your article in the front page of the Boston Globe and Associated Press." And then I was called that day to go out and speak before the media, TV stations, magazines, newspapers. Everybody was calling me. And even though I was still very weak and felt horrible from what had happened, I managed to drag myself out to those interviews and show the petition. And those TV cameras got up super, super close, and they saw all of those raw, live, in blue pen, mostly signatures, with people's respective affiliations, Harvard and BU, Schools of Public Health, and so forth. And this should have shut down the entire cell phone system at that time. It almost did. It actually stopped Sprint from putting in its antennas and from turning things on for another 6 or 7 months. And then, only then, they did it sort of little by little, this zip code and then this zip code, and they did it very secretively so that people wouldn't know when it was being turned on. By contrast, on November 15th and 16th in New York City, in Manhattan, the system had been turned on, first experimentally on and off on the 15th, and then blasting on the 16th, causing all of the people who were already electromagnetically sensitive to flee the city at a very, very freezing cold time and hide together in the woods. Literally, they did. There was one man who was very electromagnetically sensitive who could not get out because of his illness, and he died of an aneurysm shortly thereafter.
I'm sorry, where was this?
In New York City, in Manhattan, in November of 1996, when the cell phone system was first turned on there, all at once.
Okay, I'm not aware of this. Okay, so, all right, so about 20 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing that it's been that long. So the thing is, people sort of adjust to the agitation, the inner agitation that this radiation imposes upon them. Young kids may not be able to calm themselves as well as adults are. Adults know what the behavior is expected to be, and they calm themselves. But just because they behave, if you will, doesn't mean that they're not internally agitated in a way that they would not be were the radiation not there. So everyone's sort of on edge more than they would be. Everyone's much more fatigued than they would be. And then, if and when 5G comes in various places, and it already is in some places, people will become much more, if you will, zombified. And this is, I think, why there is a bill, in the U.S. House that started earlier this year for driverless cars. Why do you need driverless cars? Well, it's because drivers won't be reliable to drive. Why is everybody using a GPS to get anywhere? It's because already people are less capable of just looking at a map, figuring out the directions, and going.
Yeah, yeah. When you talked about being hit with that energy frequency.
The maser. And by the way, that was later confirmed by a guy he couldn't say it, but he was actually CIA, and he was wanting to help me, I thought, but who knows. And he
How long ago was this?
You got. That was June. It was either like 15th, 16th, somewhere around there, mid-June 1997.
Okay, all right. So that the 5G technology, I know you know this, has that beamforming technology, right, where they can be very specific to the target.
Absolutely. That's another reason why, I called it early on a weapon. That's what it is. It can be used as a weapon to target specific people right in their bedrooms and take them out or make them incapable of thinking, make them incapable of sleeping.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do that. And as we've seen from the targeted individual community, there are people who were never even politically active who have been targeted and who never were aware of having offended anyone in a major way. But why are they targeted? It's for sport or experimentation, right? And so anybody can be targeted. In other words, you can't just guarantee that you won't be targeted by sort of staying out of the way.
Yeah, it's really scary stuff. And I've read a lot about targeted individuals and what they go through. And then what happens is they are propped up as kooks, people that are just attention getters, and the symptoms and the effects and their health, what happens to them is unbelievable.
That is very, very true. And, some try to escape to other places, and sometimes they can get some temporary relief. But this is why we need to stop this whole effort. And I think we can. PCS, the cell phone system, was almost stopped by that petition in 1997. It's to date the strongest legal document that we have from the scientific community to stop radio frequency radiation atmospheric deployments, which is a huge atmospheric change that fits right in with geoengineering. I just want to say one way that fits in, if you don't mind, because often what is released from planes in the upper atmosphere involves metallic particulates. And when you have, for example, a lot of very lightweight aluminum nanoparticulates, some of it wrapped in paper, which is more or less chaff. There are different kinds of chaff, and Jolie can explain that. But and when you have that sort of floating up in the sky and then gradually coming down, but if you start with just one line, let's say that a plane has left there, that line in the sky is very conductive, and communications can be carried across that line because of its conductivity by way of wireless radiation. There are all sorts of things that are sort of planned in addition for the atmosphere. Project Loon, which is a Google project that is absolutely horrific. It involves taking balloons that have cell towers on them to deploy more microwave radiation at about 62,000 feet, in other words, up above where the military planes would be flying. The balloons can only be up there for about 100 days, so they have to go up, and then they have to come down and hopefully not collide with anything along the way. But to put that kind of radiation up there along with the satellite radiation that's there already beaming down to Earth allows for very specific targeting, even targeting of a specific airplane that someone wants to bring down. The targeting of a pilot was a conception that Russians were exploring as far back as, I believe, the 1930s or 40s. Yeah.
I for the longest time, I have contended that the spraying, a big piece of that is actually the wiring of the atmosphere. It's to make it all, it's all connected, and so that they can do these things. And of course, many people have a hard time getting their heads wrapped around that. What do you mean they're wiring the atmosphere, Mike? But that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in with the DOD report from 1998 that Harry Reid commissioned for the Senate on environmental protection with issues related to chaff. And in this, let's see, this is page 5. It talks about the methods used to disperse chaff. And again, that's aluminum coated small particulates. And it says the methods used to disperse chaff have evolved over the years, from simply tossing it out of airplane windows to launching it with spring-loaded or pneumatic machines. Currently, the services use pyrotechnic charges, rockets, mortars, airflows, or motors to disperse chaff. Many aircraft employ pyrotechnic charges that eject chaff in bursts from small bundles weighing about 6 ounces, while others use airflows to disperse ejected chaff. The Navy uses small rockets to launch airborne charges containing 8.5 pounds of chaff and shipborne charges containing 16.8 pounds of chaff. Navy ships can also launch mortar-like charges of chaff weighing between 16 and 24 pounds. Mortars feed chaff from rolls of about 40 pounds through cutters carried on some aircraft to produce either bursts or continuous stream. The continuous stream technique, called saturation chaff, may be used by aircraft to cover a large area. By 2005 or 2006, the Army also plans to use saturation chaff to mask vehicle and troop movements. Using a cutter, 360 pounds of chaff from 9 40-pound rolls can be deployed in 10 minutes. Depending on the method and the number of aircraft, such releases could disperse billions of fibers. The B-52 can carry about 750 7-ounce boxes of chaff. Each box contains up to 11 million fibers that can be expelled continuously or in bursts. And it goes on. And I'll send you this link so that everyone can go and become familiar with this document because it's important.
Yeah, the thing is, it's what it gets down to, and Jolie, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, this is not theory anymore. This is the thing. People talk, oh, it's conspiracy theory, it's a theory.
No.
And it's not a theory. Well, all of this information is out there. It's out there. All you need to do is take the time to research it and connect dots, and you can get the picture, But it's amazing at how many people, as I mentioned before, they do not want to do any research. They don't want to connect any dots. They want to sit in front of their flat screen TV. They want to watch their dopey TV shows, right? And just function in life at a bare minimum. We really need to wake people up because at that rate and pace, we only have one ship, the USS Earth. That's it. And we're all on it. And if these folks don't wake up, we're going down with it. And I don't want the ship to go down. And I know you guys don't either.
Right.
Not an option.
Susan, before when you were talking about people being pressured not to talk about this stuff, I can't talk about it. If I did this, I would lose my tenure. Are you aware in all of the time you've been doing the work that did anybody ever come to you and say, hey, look, I signed a secrecy agreement. I signed a non-disclosure. I signed a confidentiality agreement. I just can't talk about this stuff. Did you ever run across that?
I have run across other kinds of secrecy agreement people. I've never had anything like that myself because I've never had any military intelligence or other, kind of connections. But there are people who have said to me, okay, you're getting into a black area here. Got to get away. So, black meaning black budget, meaning, there's some sort of classified information here. And, there are people who have told me those things about, let's say, in connection with 9/11. And, yeah, obviously it works differently, I think, in the public health science community. I think there are enough pressures from publishers, editors, department chairs, that sort of thing. That, in other words, the puppet strings are pulled in such a way that they don't need to say, hey, you're saying something classified here. It's real easy to just constrain them otherwise, from what I've seen. But certainly at a place like MIT, where a lot of it is military intelligence activity, there are classified projects, and a lot of that. And I just want to point out one actually that was revealed to me that is certainly no longer classified because it's way past the 50-year limit that most of these projects have. There was a guy who worked at the MIT Gravitational Lab and knew a lot of the older guys from way back. And in 1992, so I go way back too, in 1992 he told me, the older guys say that when there was research going on for the electrical grid before it was in place, and they wanted to see whether they should use 50 hertz or 60 hertz. 50 hertz was already being used in Europe, and so they were doing human experiments, and they found that 60 hertz was better at killing people quickly for capital punishment purposes. And for that reason, they chose to go with 60 hertz for the electrical grid.
All right. So the reason they went with it was because they knew it was lethal.
Well, in that it would kill people more quickly than 50 hertz for whatever reason.
Yeah, but the point what you're saying is, if I heard you correctly, is it was 50 or 60. They went with 60 because 60 was more lethal. It would kill people more quickly.
Well, I think that there were two layers to that. One was, yeah, they maybe wanted to use it for capital punishment or were thinking about that. And two is that I think that they already had the concept that when you do something at lower levels that are sort of imperceptible to people, people will die early, but not noticeably from it.
Right.
Right? They won't be able to attribute it. So everybody's dying early because we have electricity, number one. And wherever there's electricity, now there's also what is the so-called smart grid. It's actually the advanced metering infrastructure where people have these utility meters that are very, very harmful to themselves, their pets, their plants, and so forth, and that also spy on them, right, and collect very personal data, frankly. And then overlaid upon this are the 2G, 3G, 4G, and then in some places already 5G. And, of course, people are a bit like frogs beginning to boil in the pan.
Yep.
You know, and they get warmer and warmer and warmer, and they stay in denial because they're still looking at their TV screen very foolishly. I had actually an experience when I was 17 where I was spiritually guided not to watch any TV ever, and actually to get the family TV out of the living room, the so-called living room where people were supposed to live rather than the programming room where they got programmed by TV.
Right.
So that actually happened, and I stopped watching TV at that age, which is, I think, what has enabled me to absorb so much important, potent material toward everyone's, if you will, salvation from what the military intelligence industrial bankster complex is trying to do.
Now, Susan, were you ever told verbally to back off, to get away from your research?
Oh, of course. And people would, you know, there was a lot of derogatory stuff. There were put downs. There was defamation all over the place.
No, I mean in a threatening way, where they say, hey, you better get off this path because if you don't, something bad's going to happen. That's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of derogatory stuff, defamation, that caused people in various networks not to speak with me or not to be in support in any way, right? And to their own harm and disadvantage. Unfortunately, for example, back in 1994, I was the person who got chemical sensitivity, which is really chemical injury, recognized by the federal government. And because I was being defamed by one person who was indeed, I learned later, an infiltrator, and because that person got everybody else scared about me, of course, the powers that be are always going to go after whoever is the most effective person, and that person is going to be the target for defamation. Anyway, but it meant that, I was all alone doing everything, without a penny. I mean, I never was funded anyway to do anything, but it was actually what they call Drain the Swamp. It's a program that Donald Rumsfeld discussed in an interview on September 12th, just after 9/11 in 2001. Some journalists were asking him, well, what are you going to do with this Osama bin Laden? He said, well, we have this program called, he actually called it Dry Up the Swamp. It's really called Drain the Swamp. And what we do is we, freeze and seize the assets of the target, and then we freeze and seize the assets of the circle around the target, and we make the target highly unpopular to the inner and outer circles, and then he went on and on about what Drain the Swamp really is.
Yeah.
And everything that he mentioned had happened to me and other key people that I had witnessed who were doing great things, the most important, potent things. And for that reason, I've come to the point where whenever someone says, oh, so-and-so is an infiltrator, I always step back and think, is that person actually the number one leader here who's getting more things done than anyone else? So that's my first question, and it's not always the case, but I inquire before I jump to conclusion about that.
And you had 5 colleagues you mentioned before. I wanted to follow up on this. Their houses burned down?
Yes, and there was an attempt on my home too, but it didn't work. My home was struck by lightning 3 times in about 7 years, but it did not catch fire.
Interesting, very interesting.
Of course, the thing is, it's very easy with geoengineering to target a home with lightning. That's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I'm asking these questions because I think a lot of times people listen to shows like this and they don't really understand that many of the guests that I have that come on the show, the work that they're doing is extremely risky to them personally. Very, very risky. And you're not the only one who's come onto my show to say that they have had things happen. I've had folks come on the show and tell me they were outright threatened to stop doing what they were doing. Like people showing up at 2 a.m. in the morning at their front door.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, we've had lots and lots of things like that.
Okay, I just want to make sure we get that out there, too. This is not, folks, this is not conspiratainment.
There are people who, in every case, lead an effort, a good effort, for the benefit of humanity, for the benefit of life on Earth, right? And that's what Jolie and I are doing, and many people are doing it. I think that sometimes people who are relatively new to this get a little worried that they're going to be targeted. And don't worry, you won't be, because we're the ones leading the effort, and the leaders are the ones who are targeted. You can do little things behind the scenes that are great, and don't worry, they won't know it. They won't target you unless you're seeking glory and money from it. If you do that, yeah, of course.
Yep. Okay. Jolie, let me just ask you to come on back into the conversation. How about what's happening in Rhode Island with the legislation? Is it going anywhere? Is it getting traction, or is it basically being stonewalled?
No, it definitely had quite a bit of support. And, the session came abruptly to an end this last, a couple weeks ago, I guess, before our bill got heard on the floor. It was on the way to the floor. It had passed out of committee and had quite a bit of support in terms of going into the next phase, which would be a commission to help educate the members of the committee. And so it's going. It's got a lot of traction for the next, when recess is over. And I'm very, very thrilled to be able to share the fact that the UK now has a version of this document that's drafted. So in our Zero Geoengineering campaign, we're sending letters to the legislators from not only the USA, but from the UK and Canada and Australia so far. And so Rhode Island is fantastic, and what it's allowed us to do is have a prototype so that we can do this in every state and in every nation and take back our self-governance, because, through all of these technologies and military technologies, I mean, we know who's doing it. The CIA is financing the Harvard, the Stanford, all of these weather industries. So, we just have to show up, continue to show up. And I'm very just excited and thrilled, because a lot of people are doing that and finding the path in different states. For example, Maine, Colorado, Florida. Many of these states have people that are very active right now. Rhode Island, even. We have several people in Rhode Island who have visited their members on the committee. 25 people have given the legislation to Senator Whitehouse. So we're making progress, and we're just not waiting around for, someone to tell us something on the news or anything like that. It's just very much hands-on, and we're just hoping that people find out what's going on, pick up the ball, and run with it. wherever they happen to be, because I think that this is the element that can't be controlled, the people, the fourth branch of government just getting involved. And we hope that it's going to be geoengineering and 5G that people are getting involved with. But there's a lot of issues. And if people show up at their state houses with the relevant documents and fighting for something, like fighting for anti-geoengineering legislation, it's powerful, and we're getting results, and we're just starting this now. So, I can barely keep up, and I'm just hoping that it continues and that people find their voice and that they find their passion and their power and feel supported. That's one thing that we're trying to do, is help support others, because it's not easy. But if you have one other person, then you can do something. You can do anything. So
now, Jolie, in that legislation, is 5G covered?
Yes, because electromagnetism is defined as an air contaminant. And Susan she was just pivotal in getting the electromagnetism firmly into this bill.
Very importantly, on July 19th in Providence, Rhode Island, there's a public hearing from 4 to 8 p.m. at Hotel Providence. This has to do with the Navy's intention to fire missiles, rockets, lasers, grenades, torpedoes, and to detonate mines and explosive buoys and use all types of sonar in live war exercises, inland and offshore waters, all along the entire east coast of the U.S. And right now, we can stop this. There's an environmental impact study of these war games, as they call them, that was released on June 30th, and the public comment is open until August 29th. So if people can get to that hearing on July 19th in Providence, at Hotel Providence, and then if they can go up to Maine and be there between July 23rd and 28th, we could make a huge splash, and it would be absolutely wonderful if people could get there. This set of war games is called Atlantic Fleet Training and Testing Phase 3. So the dates and the exact locations of the live weapon and sonar exercises haven't been released, but we know that it's all over the entire East Coast. And in all, they say that 2.6 million square miles of land and sea along the Atlantic coast and the Gulf of Mexico are intended to be part of this aerial and underwater weapons firing. The Navy acknowledges that this live ammunition training will use long-range gunnery, mine training, air warfare, amphibious warfare, and anti-submarine warfare. And they say that there will be weapons used near civilian locations. And they say that in conjunction with the National Marine Fisheries Service, they're offering like 3 different options for the battle exercises that they want to take place. These are, importantly, they acknowledge that there will be harm to sea life, including entanglements, vessel strikes, the ingesting of harmful materials, hearing loss in sea life, physiological stress, changes in behavior, and that some of these will be permanent. In fact, they even say that the sea life is expected to be harmed by the explosives and the sonar, but the Navy says, well, it doesn't expect to threaten an entire population of a species. Now, just imagine if one person sitting in a house somewhere in the U.S., just a normal little person who had a cat or a dog, and exposed that cat or dog to live artillery and massive noise, that person could go to jail for harming one animal. We need to stop this. So anybody who can, please get there. Hotel Providence, July 19th in the afternoon. Be there early, but it runs from 4 to 8.
These people are completely out of their minds. They are completely out of their minds. They're insane. They are insane people.
Yeah, it's a runaway train.
If people can get it from, if you will, the upper level people who have been involved in this, but who have been, in the case of Ronald Bernard, he's been transformed. He had an out-of-body experience after they were torturing and targeting him, and he came around to our side. Please see his videos, because he explains that they are psychopaths, And yes, they're doing it for what they conceive to be their religious purposes. He says they consider themselves, quote unquote, they call themselves, quote, Luciferians. And that requires sacrifice of living beings, sport, torture, death, and that religion is being practiced by the, people who own the world effectively because they have that much money and power. And he believes that we can unite and we can do something good to stop all of this.
Well, we better unite. Humanity has to unite. We have to come together. It's really unbelievable. It makes me very, very angry when I hear stuff like that, Susan. I did a show with Sophia Smallstorm, and, Sophia talked about what was going on in the Pacific and how all of the sea life was being harmed by all of the testing that the military was doing in the Pacific that they never talk about. So it's just amazing. Well, let's wrap up this way. Again, a fantastic conversation. Susan, I'd love to have you come back again to talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. It was really fascinating. And Jolie always, she knows she has an open invitation to come on the show. But if you had 5 minutes of somebody's attention, what would you tell them about 5G to get them to wake up a little bit? What would you tell them, Susan?
This is not about connectivity. It actually will disconnect everyone. One of the reasons is, and if people can understand their own spiritual, intuitive connections, maybe sometimes they just want to call somebody and that person calls them. We all have that native connectivity. It is man-made or xenobiotic, foreign to life radiation, radio frequency microwave radiation that interferes with the real connectivity, with the real natural connectivity that we could develop if we were free from this. It's life on Earth that sustains us. We can't live without pollinating insects. 5G will kill off all pollinating insects. Within 10 years, it will kill off all birds. It has to, by way of the sizes of its wavelengths, the fact that it's digital, it's pulse modulated, the fact that it's intended to be 24/7, 365 forever. It has to kill off, ultimately, all life, especially in connection with the larger program of geoengineering, creating these vast atmospheric changes by way of vast atmospheric contamination of chemicals and nuclear radiation and electromagnetics. So we need to stop this. We can stop it if we all get together right now and really join together and focus our energies on life on Earth, protecting and saving and restoring life on Earth.
Beautifully said. Beautifully. Jolie, your parting words.
Well, I just want to thank you both so much because it's just enlightening to listen and discuss these important things with both of you. And, it's inspiring. It just makes me want to just get ready and start plowing through more emails and call more people and talk to more people around the world and see what we can do. And thank you, Susan, so much. I hope if anyone can show up on July 19th, you want to get up there, contact me. And also if you want to go visit your state house to go push the anti-geoengineering agenda that we have, you can contact me as well, and I'll be happy to help you coordinate your documents and maybe get some people to go up there with you. And I just want to thank everyone for just hanging in there and we'll just keep going, keep on keeping on.
And your website, Jolie, and I'll ask Susan about her contact information too, but you go first. Give us your websites again.
Yes, if you could go to zerogeoengineering.com and 05g.com. You can find out information to get involved and take action on both of these problems.
Susan, is there a way for folks to dig into your research or to see what you're working on?
I don't have a website. That's sort of my thing, to not have one. But some of my work can be seen on rfemf.com. That's RF as in frequency, EMF, as in fields.com, and Scientists 4, the number 4, wiredtech.com. Very good sites. And I would also suggest, with regard to the war games that are planned for the East Coast, people can go to ecori.org, ecori.org, and can learn about the war games planned for the East Coast.
And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.